Good morning, everyone. We are Group G, and today we will be presenting to you wastewater treatment. So, before we go to primary to tertiary, let's first talk about pre-treatment. Why exactly is there a need for pre-treatment? This is because wastewater contains with it various items. For example, it can have metal, solvents, chemicals, cleaners, and oil that can be suspended in the wastewater that make it difficult for the treatment process. Two things can either happen. Number one, it clogs up the system, or number two, it makes it costly to remove them from the system when there is too much accumulation of them. So if you're wondering, for example, when we took NChem, why we couldn't dispose of acids, bases, or whatever chemicals into the sink, this is the primary reason. This is especially exacerbated when it comes to, for example, factories that end up disposing trace amounts of these items into the wastewater. Having this will be very costly later on, so to prevent that, we need pre-treatment. So the first pre-treatment is essentially the physical one. What happens is a process called comminution, where we use grinding devices to essentially break down massive items. For example, it could be lumber, metal bars, or maybe even plastic bottles that somehow ended up into the wastewater system. These get grinded up into smaller particles so that they can be filtered out by the screens later. The second is chemical pretreatment, which can be divided into three. The first is pH adjusters. What happens when you increase the pH of a wastewater is that you produce more negatively charged hydroxide ions. These ions now bond with the positively charged metal ions, which now bond into a bigger particle, which makes it a lot easier to be filtered out by the screens in the primary to tertiary process. Now, the second is what we call coagulants. What it does is it consolidates and combines suspended contaminants for easy removal. So instead of them just spreading out through the different filters, which make it a lot more time consuming to remove during the cleaning process of the different treatment plants, we can have them just bind together through these coagulants. The third is somewhat similar to this, which is called flocculants. What it does is it aggregates contaminants into flakes or flocks, which end up happening or turning into two things. They either combine and float, or they combine and sink, which will make a lot more sense later on when we go to the primary treatment process. So let's head there. So for the primary treatment, it's divided into three parts. The first are the screens, second are the grit chamber, and third is the sedimentation tank. So what happens in the screens is it essentially filters and prevents solid particles from flowing into the rest of the other chambers and the other treatment parts. This is very important because these treatment parts contain within it pipes and chambers, which can be clogged by these major solid particles if they're not filtered out. This is costly in the long run and requires a lot more maintenance, therefore reducing the amount of wastewater that can be processed and cleaned. So, second, we have the grit chamber. Grit refers to sand, small stones, gravel, and other particles of similar sizes. So, these essentially are not that buoyant and relatively heavy compared to water. So, they settle at the bottom. When they settle at the bottom, they do not flow into the rest of the other parts of the treatment plants and make it so that it's easier to filter. So, after the grit chamber, we have the sedimentation tank. So, in the sedimentation tank, whatever is not filtered out by the grit chamber or whatever particles do not settle down, they settle down here. The most special one are basically biological masses that settle at the bottom. So, you reduce the flow, a lot of the extra ones flow to the bottom. Now, according to the US EPA or the Environmental Protection Agencies, these are essentially called raw primary biosolids. So after this, we now move on to the secondary treatment.
Next up is the secondary treatment, which is involved with the process of eliminating organic material. This organic material can be composed of food waste, human waste, and animal waste, just to name a few. The secondary treatment is then divided into two parts, namely the aeration basin and then the secondary clarifier. The aeration basin works by having oxygen be pumped into the water. This oxygen then helps with the growth of microorganisms, which then do the act of aerobic digestion. Aerobic digestion is basically having the microorganisms consume the organic material and then turn it into sludge. Both aerobic digestion and sludge will be discussed even further later on in the video. This mixture of water and sludge is then placed into another clarifier, in which they are separated by having the sludge settle. Some of the sludge is then taken and put back into the aeration basin. This sludge is called the return activated sludge. It serves the purpose of helping to sustain the population of microorganisms inside of the aeration basin. Finally, we have the tertiary treatment. This treatment is involved with the removal of microbial contaminants, residual pollutants, and any remaining finer particulate that may have been left behind during the primary and secondary treatments. Of the filtrations that happen during the tertiary treatment, there are two that stand out the most, this being disinfection and nutrient removal. Disinfection deals with the elimination of pathogens, bacteria, and viruses that have contaminated the water. As of now, there are three methods to disinfection, each with their own pros and cons. Engineers choose from these methods based on a multitude of factors, such as flow rate, cost, and even location of the plant. On the other hand, we have nutrient removal. As the name suggests, this deals with the removal of excess nutrients in the water, such as nitrogen and phosphorus. This is a necessary step as the excess nutrients may become harmful to the environment once the water is released. As mentioned, there are three methods disinfecting the water, these being through the use of chlorine, ozone, and UV. Chlorine is added to the water and is able to kill off bacteria because it is a chemical disinfectant. However, because it is a chemical disinfectant, it must first be removed from the water before it can be discharged back into the environment. The second method is through the use of ozone. Ozone is able to kill off any bacteria and microbial contaminants because it is a strong oxidant. This method works by adding an electrical current to the water in order to turn the O2 inside of the water into ozone. The third method is through the use of UV. UV works by scrambling the DNA of the bacteria. Rather than killing the contaminants, it instead sterilizes it. This still prevents the contaminants from either harming your body or multiplying inside of your body.
Sludge handling and management. But what is sludge? Sludge refers to the residual, semi-solid material left from industrial wastewater or sewage treatment processes. There are three sources of sludge, which is the municipal wastewater treatment plants. It comes from treating sewage and wastewater. Next is the industrial processes. It generates sludge from manufacturing and chemical processing. Another is agricultural waste management, creates sludge from handling animal manure, crop residues, and farm runoff. There are five types of sludge processes handled. First is the primary operations, thickening, stabilization, dewatering, heat drying, and incineration. Primary operations. This process includes grinding or particle size reduction, screening or removal of fibrous materials, degrading or grit removal, blending, and storage for flow equalization. Next is thickening. It is to increase solid contents percentage of sludge by removing portion of liquid fraction. And there are methods of thickening, which is gravity thickening, flotation thickening, and centrifugation. Stabilization. It aims to reduce organic content, reduce pathogens, and eliminate offensive odors, production of fusible gas, in which stabilization can be done using anaerobic digestion, in which organic matter is broken down by bacteria in the presence of oxygen. It converts bacteria into carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia. Next is the aerobic digestion, in which bacteria decomposes organic matter in the presence of oxygen. The bacteria converts the organic matter into carbon dioxide. Lastly is the lime stabilization. By adding lime, it increases the pH levels, it reduces the growth of pathogens, and minimizes odor. Dewatering, a physical unit of operation used to reduce the moisture content of a sludge. There are two methods of dewatering, which is centrifugation. It means separating liquids of different densities and thickening slurries. Next is the belt filter press. It uses the principle of gravity drainage and mechanically applied pressure. Heat drying. It involves the application of heat to evaporate water and to reduce the moisture content of biosolids through conduction, convection, and radiation. There are two types of heat drying, which is direct drying and indirect drying. For direct drying, wastewater comes into contact with hot gases that causes evaporation of moisture. And for indirect drying, moisture evaporates when wastewater solids contact with metal surfaces heated by a hot medium. Then for incineration, it involves total conversion of organic solids to oxidized and end products. Sludge stabilization is not necessary before incineration. So H2O or water, carbon dioxide, and ash are primarily the end product of incineration. Methods of sludge disposal. First is the landfill, which is very common and the oldest form of waste disposal. The sludge that cannot be safely reused may be sent to landfills after proper treatment and dewatering. Next is for agricultural use, which they utilize nutrients and such as phosphorus, nitrogen, and to utilize organic substances for soil improvement. Other methods like ocean disposal, in which they dump or controlled release in the marine water, and distribution and marketing, wherein they sell the sludge in bagged or in bulk form. Lastly is a surface disposal, in which a controlled area where sewage sludge is placed for longer or for a year. Wastewater minimization for sustainability. Wastewater minimization is very essential component of sustainable water management, in which it reduces the volume of wastewater, it improves the efficiency of water use, and they also minimize the environmental impact for industrial, municipal, and agricultural water systems. There are key strategies for wastewater minimization. The first is water efficiency measures. It means the practicing of water conservation, reuse and recycling, the process of optimization for industrial processes. Next is the pollution prevention and source control, which is the practice of cleaner production techniques, the process of modification, and the pre-treatment systems to remove the hazardous substances before the wastewater is discharged into municipal sewers or other water bodies. Next is the separation of waste streams. From segregating or separating contaminated water from relatively clean streams, it prevents unnecessary mixing and allows more targeted treatment, which reducing the volume of wastewater and the requiring advanced treatment. Next is the waste treatment and reuse. There are on-site treatment systems and advanced treatment technologies. Next is the leakage prevention and maintenance, which means that there are regular infrastructure maintenance and upgrading the aging infrastructure. There are benefits of wastewater minimization, in which the environmental benefits are the reduction in water pollution, decreased pressure on a natural water bodies, it lowers carbon footprint. And for the economic benefits, it is cost savings, the resource recovery, and the compliance with the regulation. Social benefits is the public health protection and enhanced water security. That's all. Thank you for listening. We hope you learned something from our report. If you have questions, feel free to ask.